It wasn't the lipstick on a collar or a stranger's perfume. It was the way Claire sat across from David at the dinner table and realized that if she disappeared tomorrow, he wouldn't cry. He would just keep setting the table for two, out of habit, never noticing the empty chair. The radiator clicked behind her, a soft metallic tapping like a heart beating from far away. Outside, Portland's rain slicked the windows in slow, icy lines. Inside, the silence was thick and warm, like a blanket soaked in stillness. Claire stirred her soup. David scrolled on his phone. "Did you hear back from the plumber?" she asked. David didn't look up. "Yeah. Tuesday morning." She nodded. "That was it." "No, how was your day? No, you look tired." They used to laugh, argue, kiss in the kitchen, dance barefoot at midnight. Now they spoke like roommates on the verge of moving out. Claire swallowed hard, the soup suddenly too salty. She wanted to scream. But instead, she smiled, like she always did, and cleared the dishes. Claire Moore was 32, well-educated, employed, and, on paper, perfectly married. She managed publicity for a boutique publishing company downtown, the kind that printed limited-run poetry collections and obscure literary fiction. It wasn't glamorous, but it made her feel like she still lived in a world where words mattered. Her husband, David, worked from home as a software engineer. He was quiet, gentle, and unfailingly polite. He made coffee for her every morning, took out the trash, and never raised his voice. In 8 years, he had never called her a name, never cheated, never even forgot her birthday. And yet, Claire felt lonelier in their shared bed than she had when she lived alone. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe she had changed. But then she realized, David hadn't changed either. He had simply stopped seeing her. He asked about meetings, not emotions. Remembered deadlines, not desires. He was dependable, yes, but not present. He existed like a background noise, always there, never noticed. Like the sound of the fridge humming. Like the hum of a dying star. 3 months before everything unraveled, Claire began waking up in the middle of the night. No nightmares. Just a heavy feeling, like grief with no name. She would lie there, staring at the ceiling fan, counting the slow rotations. David slept beside her, his back turned, breathing even. She wondered if he ever dreamt of her anymore. One night, unable to stand the silence, she slipped out of bed and opened her laptop. She started writing, not for work, not for anyone, just memories, fragments of conversations, pieces of the person she used to be. Once, she had wanted to write a novel. But now she wrote as if trying to remind herself that she was still alive. She filled a folder with untitled Word documents and buried it deep inside her hard drive, next to old photos she couldn't bring herself to delete. One morning, as David poured coffee into her cup, Claire asked, "Do you think we're happy?" He paused. "We're fine." Fine. Fine was the word you used when the truth was too awkward to say. In mid-November, Claire attended a birthday party for a coworker at a small, artsy wine bar. David didn't come, he said he had too much work and didn't like loud places anyway. She didn't mind. She wore a navy blue dress that hugged her waist and let her curls fall loose for the first time in months. She hadn't expected to feel anything that night. But then she met Ethan Rivera. He wasn't remarkable at first glance, flannel shirt, camera slung across his chest, hair tied in a careless knot. He was a friend of the birthday girl and worked as a freelance photographer. They struck up a conversation near the bar, starting with a joke about the terrible music, then a shared appreciation for obscure books. He asked questions, real ones. Not just, "What do you do?" but, "Why do you do it?" He listened. And when she talked, he looked at her like he actually saw her. They talked for almost 2 hours. When Claire finally looked at her phone, she had 5 missed calls from David. Ethan smiled and said, "You've got someone waiting at home." She nodded. But for the first time, she didn't feel guilty. She just felt sad. Because David hadn't called out of worry. He had called out of routine. The next week, Claire found herself texting Ethan. At first, it was innocent. She asked for a photo he had taken of her at the bar. Then he sent her one, a candid shot where she was mid-laugh, glass in hand, light glowing behind her hair. She looked alive in it. Like someone she used to be. He asked if she wanted to grab coffee sometime. She said yes. She told David she had to work late. They met at a cozy, hidden cafe in the Pearl District. Rain drizzled softly on the windows. Claire sat across from Ethan and forgot about her phone. He asked about her writing. She blushed, no one had asked her that in years. They talked about everything, music, regrets, childhood, death. He didn't touch her. But when he said goodbye, his fingers brushed hers, and it felt more intimate than a kiss. On the way home, Claire cried in the car. Not out of guilt. But because she had remembered what it felt like to want something. That night, David was on the couch watching a documentary. Claire stood behind him for a moment, watching the way the screen reflected in his glasses, the way his face didn't change. She wanted to tell him. She wanted him to fight. To yell. To ask what was wrong. But he just looked up and asked, "Hey, can you grab me another beer?" Claire stared at him. "Sure," she said softly, heading to the fridge. And in that moment, she knew, she wasn't married to a monster or a liar. She was married to someone who had stopped seeing her long ago. And she wasn't sure if she had the strength to stay invisible forever. Claire didn't intend to fall in love with Ethan. She thought it would be a moment, an interlude in the gray narrative of her life, like a pause between chapters that no one else would read. She believed she could step into that cafe, talk about books and music, and step out unchanged. But Ethan was not a pause. He was a ripple in still water, and Claire had been standing still for far too long. "I'm going to Seattle for a company retreat," she told David one Thursday morning over breakfast. She stirred her oatmeal even though she wasn't hungry. He didn't look up from his laptop. "Okay. When will you be back?" "Sunday night." He nodded. "Do you want me to pick you up from the airport?" She smiled. "No need. I'll Uber." She didn't go to Seattle. She went to the coast. Ethan picked her up in his rusted black Subaru, camera bag in the back seat, music humming low from the speakers. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't reach for her hand. But when he looked at her, there was an understanding in his eyes that made Claire's chest ache. The road to Cannon Beach was misty and long. Trees swayed like ghosts on either side of the highway. Claire rested her head against the window and felt like a passenger in someone else's story, someone freer, braver, selfish. But for once, she didn't feel guilty about it. She just felt alive. They stayed in a tiny rental cabin facing the sea. Claire brought one duffel bag and left her wedding ring on the nightstand. Not as a protest. Not even consciously. It just felt unnecessary. They walked along the empty beach under a sky full of soft clouds. They cooked together in the small kitchen, drank cheap wine, and played vinyl records on an old turntable someone had left behind. They kissed for the first time while standing barefoot on the porch, the ocean wind tangling her hair, salt on her lips, Ethan's hand gently brushing her cheek. It wasn't lust. It wasn't escape. It felt like remembrance. Like something she had once known and buried. That night, they made love in quiet desperation, not like two strangers discovering each other, but like two people trying to memorize something they knew they couldn't keep. Claire cried afterward, her head on Ethan's chest. He didn't ask why. He just held her. On Sunday afternoon, as they packed to leave, Ethan finally broke the spell. "What happens next?" he asked softly, folding a sweater into his bag. Claire stood by the window, watching the tide pull away from the shore. Her voice was almost a whisper. "I don't know. Do you love him? I don't know. Do you love me?" She turned to him. Her eyes were tired. "I think I love the version of myself that exists when I'm with you." That wasn't the answer he wanted. But it was the only honest one she had. He nodded, jaw tense. "I don't want to be a secret forever, Claire." She looked down. "I know." When she got home Sunday night, David was watching football. He glanced up, then back at the screen. "Good trip?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "Relaxing." He didn't press. He didn't sniff her clothes or question her stories. He didn't check her phone. Because he trusted her. Or because he didn't care anymore. Claire stood in the kitchen alone, letting the silence pour in. Then she took her phone out, opened her gallery, and deleted every picture from the weekend: Ethan's smile at the beach, their dinner by candlelight, her own laughing face captured in a mirror. Gone. Like a dream you erase before waking up. Over the next few weeks, Claire tried to return to normal. She went to work. Cooked dinner. Had obligatory conversations with David that never touched anything real. She told Ethan she needed space, and he didn't text for days. Then one night, he sent a single message. "You were never invisible to me." She didn't reply. She couldn't. Because if she answered, she would have to choose. And she still wasn't ready. One evening, after another dinner filled with silences, David turned off the TV and asked, "Are you in love with someone else?" Claire froze. She hadn't expected the question. She thought he wasn't paying attention. She stared at him across the room, the space between them suddenly a chasm. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." David didn't flinch. He just nodded, as if something he'd been holding finally unraveled. His voice was quiet. "I think we both stopped loving each other a long time ago. We just didn't want to admit it." Claire sat down. "I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't," he said. "Not really. You just left." A pause. Then, "Do you want to leave for real?" She couldn't lie anymore. Yes. There were no screaming matches. No broken dishes. No infidelity accusations hurled across the room. Claire moved out 3 days later into a small furnished apartment above a flower shop. She took only what she needed: clothes, laptop, a stack of her favorite books. David helped her carry the boxes. They didn't cry. They didn't hug. They just said goodbye like strangers who had once known each other in another life. That night, alone in her new space, Claire stood in front of the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she felt real for the first time in years. Ethan texted her the next morning. "Are you okay?" She typed a reply. Erased it. Typed again. Erased again. Finally, she wrote. "I left." A moment passed. Then his reply. "Come over." She looked at the screen. Then at the window, where sunlight poured through for the first time in weeks. But she didn't move. Not yet. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running towards someone or away from someone. She was just still, learning who she was without needing anyone to define it. The first morning in her new apartment, Claire woke to silence. Not the kind she used to dread, the thick, suffocating silence of a dying marriage, but a gentler kind. The kind that asked nothing of her. The kind that allowed her to just be. Outside, the florist downstairs had already begun arranging buckets of fresh tulips and ranunculus along the sidewalk. Claire watched from her window as a little girl stopped to smell the blooms, then ran off laughing toward her mother. Life moved forward, even when you weren't ready. Claire boiled water for coffee. No second mug, no one to talk to, no obligation to speak or smile. For the first time in years, her thoughts weren't drowned out by the need to pretend. It was terrifying. And liberating. Claire didn't rush to see Ethan. She didn't rush to see anyone. She spent her days working, and her evenings walking around the neighborhood, slowly learning to be alone without being lonely. She went to a bookstore and bought a leather journal. She started writing again, not to escape, but to make sense of who she had become. Sometimes, she cried in the shower. Sometimes, she danced barefoot in the living room when a song came on that reminded her of being 20 and fearless. She was rebuilding something, though she didn't know what. And then, one quiet afternoon, Ethan showed up at her door. He stood in the hallway, a little thinner than she remembered, holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag of croissants. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," he said. Claire leaned against the doorframe, barefoot, hair unbrushed. "I didn't know what I wanted either." He held up the coffee. "Truce." She hesitated for a breath, then stepped aside. Inside, they didn't kiss. They didn't touch. They just sat across from each other on the small sofa and drank coffee, letting the silence speak. "I missed you," he said finally. Claire looked down at her hands. "I needed to miss myself first." Ethan nodded. He understood more than she expected. They talked about everything and nothing, her apartment, his new photography project, how strange it felt to start over in your 30s. When he left, he didn't ask when he'd see her again. And Claire didn't promise anything. But this time, the space between them felt like choice, not distance. Weeks passed. David sent her a letter, not an email, not a text. A real letter, in his precise handwriting. "Claire. I've been thinking about that last night. About how we didn't cry. Maybe we were already done grieving before we even said the words. I don't hate you. I don't blame you. I hope you find the thing you were looking for. I hope you let yourself have it. Take care of yourself. David." Claire held the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it finally made sense. Love could end without villains. Some stories didn't need flames and fury. Some simply faded. And that was okay. One Sunday morning, Ethan called. "I'm in the park near your place. I brought my camera. Thought you might want to come walk with me." Claire stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. Then she grabbed a coat and headed out. They walked side by side, not touching, the wind light and cool against their faces. Ethan stopped now and then to take photos, shadows on brick walls, a crow perched on a lamppost, Claire laughing at a street musician playing off-key. At one point, he turned the camera toward her. "Can I take your picture?" She didn't pose. She just stood there, hands in her pockets, eyes tired but clear. He clicked once. "Got it," he said. They sat on a bench overlooking the fountain. Children ran past, shouting, spinning in circles. Claire exhaled. "I don't want to be someone's escape anymore," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. "I don't want to be a secret." Claire nodded. "Then let's not be either." He smiled. And for once, it wasn't the start of something dramatic. It was just two people, choosing to meet again, without pretending, without promises they couldn't keep. 1 year later. Claire's book was almost done. A memoir disguised as fiction, or fiction disguised as truth. She hadn't decided. But the final chapter ended with a woman standing alone on a cold beach, holding her own hand. Not sad. Not triumphant. Just real. Ethan still took photos. Sometimes of her, sometimes not. Sometimes they slept in the same bed. Sometimes they didn't. But they were honest now. About everything. Claire sent David a copy of her manuscript. No note. Just the book. She didn't know if he read it. But that was okay too. Winter returned, but it didn't feel as heavy this time. Claire stood at the same window in her apartment, watching snow fall softly on the flower shop below. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for something to begin or end. She was simply there. In her life. In her skin. In her choice. Between two winters, she had finally found spring.